What's going on, everybody? It is your boy Zamboni. I'm a musician and astrologer, and it is time to talk about the astrology of the week ahead. As always, I thank you so very much for being here. Thank you for sending this to a friend if it's helpful to you, if it helps you make sense of the times, or if you just like hearing what I got to say. Thank you so much for listening to the music. There is a whole bunch of music on Spotify, Tidal, Pandora, Apple Music, wherever you get your music at. I have had a very productive year. Most recently put out a new hip hop record. It's called Bussin'. I'm super happy about it. I think it's really great. You can go to zambonifunk.com/store where you can get this kind of merch. You can get hoodies, you can get tote bags, you can get mugs, all type of things. There's a whole bunch of really cool artwork, wall hangings, all the posters, tapestries, all sorts of stuff there you can check out. Thank you for hitting up on Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. Did you know that it's my birthday this week? This is a great time. If you have been thinking about sending a little $2, maybe $35 for 35 years, something like this, this is a great week to do it. Just throwing that out there. Thank you so much for being here. Let's talk about the astrology of the week ahead. So this week, we are looking at the new moon in Scorpio. Now this new moon in Scorpio the new moon is when the moon and the sun are conjunct. So by definition, we're going to have both the sun and the moon in Scorpio. We're also going to have Mars there in Scorpio. Very closely conjunct this new moon. I think it's like 2 degrees away, 1.5, something like this. Also, this new moon is opposite to Uranus in Taurus. So everything that we had going on last week around Mars with Mars opposite Uranus, that is ongoing this week. And not only is it ongoing this week, but since that's baked into the new moon chart, then we're going to be looking at a whole month of this kind of dynamic. So what do we mean by that? So with Mars in Scorpio, then we're definitely going to be looking at some kind of important need to continue toward a task. There's a kind of relentless effort that goes on with Mars in Scorpio. The one thing that I've been thinking about here is, so I mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, something like this, the Mars or Scorpio being like the rushing river, right? It continues, it goes on, and there's a continuous force that is associated with that, water fixed in its course, right? The Scorpio is the fixed water. There's also a sense here of Scorpio is frequently associated with vengeance, and so there can be a kind of coldness or a kind of a deep strategic thinking that doesn't necessarily prioritize right now in this moment. Now, this is interesting because it's juxtaposed against this opposition to Uranus and Taurus. Uranus and Taurus is very much in the moment, spontaneous, unexpected, chaos and disruption and this sort of stuff. I often like to think about Uranus and Taurus as like Jesus comes into the temple and sees that they're changing money in there and all this, and he's like, this is some bullshit, and starts flipping tables over and that sort of thing. Everybody was chilling, having kind of a nice time, and then this dude comes in and starts kicking furniture. That's kind of how Uranus likes to operate a lot of times, right? And so that at the same time that the Mars situation is going on here, and so and it's a new moon, right? So we've got the moon in Scorpio. Sometimes I think about the moon in Scorpio as being a little bit paranoid. The moon in Scorpio, the moon is in fall in Scorpio. So sometimes when you're thinking about a fallen placement, it's a planet that is it's not a position of weakness the same way that detriment is. It's a little more this planet is very strong, but maybe using that in a way that can be harmful or that can be less than productive. So the moon in Scorpio so the moon's job is to nourish, to feel feelings, to have emotions, to be intuitive and psychic, and to feel empathetic, to feel into the vibes of the situation, what's going on here. Moon in Scorpio might get a little bit neurotic about that sort of stuff. The moon in Scorpio, one thing that I frequently say to clients who have the moon in Scorpio is that those folks rarely forget to lock the door at night, right? And they have thought about it. They probably put the chain on the door. It's serious. They are concerned about security and safety and this kind of thing. So the moon's job is definitely to think about security and safety, but in Scorpio, it tends to go really far, and there can be a certain kind of overthinking that can go on there. Add Mars into the mix, and then so Moon Mars, It's like Mars's job is to be sharp, or to bring that intemperate heat or something like that, right? So it's not comfortable by its nature. So the moon with Mars can be like discomforting. It can be some sort of situation where there's like a thorn in your side. You feel like you gotta like move a little bit in order to make something happen. And especially there might be some kind of fear that can motivate you forward or in some kind of way, or that might make it difficult to rest or something like this, right? You know, like it's in situation, it doesn't look like a situation where we're gonna see like strong, diplomacy or peace talks or this kind of thing. This looks like a pretty warring sort of placement. It looks very chaotic and disruptive. Now we do, as far as peace talks is concerned, then we can see that Venus in Libra is happening, right? So Venus is nice in Libra, and we can think about the scales of justice and this kind of thing that goes on in Libra. And then Mercury is in Sagittarius and is going to move forward far enough that we're going to see a sextile between Mercury in Sagittarius and Venus in Libra. This does look good for talking about justice, talking about fairness, equality, you know, sympathy, empathy, like how are the others doing in this situation, and how can we make a more equitable or just kind of situation here? Maybe working that out, maybe talking about a plan or a method or some kind of situation like this. This does look possible under this Mercury situation, but at the same time, with the sun here in Scorpio, also opposite this Uranus, and then we're going to see the Mars Cazimi also. So the sun is going to catch up to Mars, and so we're going to see those two together in the same degree for a few days. You know, a Mars Cazimi is super Mars. You know what I mean? Like, especially Mars in Scorpio. This is like all of the Mars things very focused. Think about like the sun. When the sun shines and then you get a magnifying glass and you can focus that energy, and then so you've got this focused light that'll set a leaf on fire or an ant or something like that, right? Maybe it was just me that did that as a kid, right? But you're familiar with the concept at least, right? So this idea of like focusing this energy. So there's the sun, the solar capacity. I really like the sun in Scorpio. Maybe it's just me. I have the sun in Scorpio. It's my birthday this week, right? Like, so maybe I'm a little biased here, but I think that the sun is pretty strong in Scorpio. There's a kind of consistency, a kind of drive and effort that is associated with Scorpio, that even though it's a little bit dark and a little bit broody or whatever, I think the sun really responds well in that situation. So we take that solar energy and then we put a bunch of Mars in it, right? Put a bunch of like that thorn, that tack in the chair, that thing that's like, yo, we got to move right now, and we're going to go hard about it. And we've got a long memory from some shit that happened a long time ago. I haven't forgotten about it, and it's maybe time for vengeance now, right? It's maybe time to destroy, or you know, the other Mars things, break something or like go really hard. This is going to be really good for like if you are an athlete or you've got a sauna practice or something like this, and you can maybe turn some of that like solar energy into some kind of beneficial sweat or something like this, then that is a total possibility here. This Mars Cazimi looks like it's really strong and maybe a little rough around the edges in that Scorpio kind of way. So this is something that we really need to be aware of. And so with that in mind here, and at the same time we've got the talky stuff happening with Venus and Mercury, then maybe this is a time when we can use some of the fear and insecurity that we know is going on. It's not like we're going to get away from that. We're not going to be like, oh, I just feel better about it, right? But rather, this might be a moment where we can breathe into that and be like, I'm kind of scared about stuff. My friends are maybe scared about stuff. My opponents are also maybe kind of scared about stuff. So if we want to get to a place of harmony in that sort of Venus and Libra equilibrium kind of way, if we want to get toward that, then I wonder if there's a way for us to acknowledge the fear and the difficulty and the insecurity and all of this sort of stuff, and maybe incorporate that into the language that we use to talk about cooperation and coalition building and team building and all this sort of stuff. I hope so. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate